Hello, this is James Barkell.
And it is wonderful to have your company here on the centre court.
You are listening to the Coach Doctor podcast.
Strikes it beautifully and it's down the middle.
In this podcast series, we discuss all things coaching and sports science.
Beats one, beats a couple, still going.
Each episode will feature prominent coaches on the front line of their sport.
Across to Mbappe.
As well as some of the world's leading university academics who research what it takes to get the W.
All Blacks under big pressure again.
If there is an aspect of your coaching that needs some assistance, you can always count on the Coach Doctor to add life to your program.
Browning's having a terrific run. The first three to qualify. You betcha!
As a warm-up for State of Origin 1, I talked with former Queensland hardman David Shillington.
This is the Origin hit. Bang. Shillington gets his left shoulder into Wayman.
Shillington. Good run, David Shillington. Gee, he's been terrific.
The Kangaroos are out of trouble. In back place, Shillington and Luke go toe-to-toe. Shillington and Luke went for it. Shillington doesn't need a formal invitation. And Orbison sweeps it away for Shillington to take number 4. So it's the O'Mealy and Shillington show so far. And there's a good one. Shillington came up swinging, and so did the knock from Cronulla, Paul Gallen.
Dave played in the amazing Queensland era alongside the likes of Greg Inglis, Cam Smith, Billy Slater and Jonathan Thurston, to name just a few, and was coached by Mal Meninga, one of Queensland's greats. He also has a distinguished NRL career with the Sydney Roosters, Canberra Raiders and the Gold Coast Titans. Dave discusses the anxiety he dealt with as an up-and-coming player in the NRL and some of the coaches who led him on his path to being an Australian representative. In retirement, Shillo is now working in mental health and has set up his own business called Prime Effect. And one of Shillo's goals off the field is shifting the paradigm of mental health to being something all members of society can openly discuss and improve through programs such as what he is now doing with Prime Effect. Dave, first of all, you've played over 215 first grade games in the NRL, 4 State of Origin series, and 14 test matches for Australia. Give me an idea around the mental preparation to compete at that level for so long.
Yeah, it was took a lot of practice, to be honest. In my early days in the NRL, I had to do a lot of work on managing, the anxiety around playing, but then also to pump yourself up to be primed and ready to play. So look, I was pretty inconsistent in my early years, but thankfully through some good mentoring from different coaches and older players, I really got the hang of it, of getting myself primed and ready to go. And look, the challenge mentally is from so many different angles. It's one, to be able to anxiety around performing, but then 2, to be able to perform at the top level, 3, to take on like competitors all the time, whether it's your opposition when you're playing or people internally your club trying to play better than you. And then it's like the media pressure, your friends and family, and you have setbacks all the time, of course, injuries, poor form, different things with your side. It was really challenging. One thing I learned over the years was to focus on my circle of control. And some of your listeners might be familiar with that, your circle of control versus your circle of concern. In your circle of concern are all those things that you're concerned about, but you can't control. So things like what the coach says to you, what your teammates do, what the opposition does, like that. The things I could control, the things I could do, was how hard I trained, those effort levels, what I put into my body, how I took care of myself away from the training paddock as well in my own time. So I learned all over the years, thanks to some good mentors and coaches, to focus on that circle of control and do what I could do to make sure I was prepared to play my best.
Dave, in terms of, you'd mentioned feeling anxious sometimes before games, especially early on in your career, what did that anxiety look like?
I like talking about it because I know a lot of people do experience the same sort of thing, that sort of performance anxiety. It was a real challenge for me early in my career, so much so that I kind of wished leading into games I'd be injured that week, so I didn't have the possibility, I guess, of playing badly, letting my teammates down and being a bit of a failure, I guess. So look, that's how bad it was for me, that sometimes I prefer to be injured. And wouldn't you know it, not a coincidence, I don't think, I was actually injured for a lot of those early years of my career. Thankfully, but as I was saying, I had some great coaches and mentors. I actually saw a counsellor too, a sports psych, when I was in my younger years, and they helped me bring awareness to where I was sort of burning all my energy in that circle of concern, and then gave me some great tips and advice to focus on what I could do. So any little performance anxiety things I had around, maybe not being fit enough or not being agile enough, because I was a pretty big player. Instead of worrying about it all the time, I took some positive steps forward and came to training early and worked with a trainer a few times a week, in addition to our normal training, to work on my fitness by jumping on the rowing machine, to work on my agility by doing different agility drills on the paddock like that. So I redirected all that energy and spent it on things that were helping my game. So in turn, I became a better player, and that anxiety reduced as well.
Yeah, I really like that idea of thinking about those things that made you anxious and then going in and working on them and developing them. So it actually almost became a point of strength maybe for you. So yeah, nice idea. In terms of Origin, is the mental preparation for playing Origin different to playing week in, week out NRL footy?
It is. It's a lot of it because it's just a massive week, like 7 to 10 days you're in camp. And there's the thrill, I guess, of getting selected or the relief of getting reselected like that. And you go into camp and you're just surrounded by legends. And whilst you're obviously not a bad player yourself, there's people like Cameron Smith and Jonathan Thurston, Greg Inglis, Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk. I could name them for days. And then you got someone like Mal Meninga coaching you. So that environment is just like the top echelon, I guess, for rugby league. Then I guess, during the week, the pressure starts building as well. You're like, oh, well, this is State of Origin. It doesn't get any better than this. We're playing the Blues this week. We've got to win. Mel, obviously, as a coach, he was never known as being, I guess, writing all the game plans and doing all those nitty-gritty things. He was the chief of motivation, setting that intent, that desire to win for Queensland if he didn't have it already. And, he was fantastic like that. So when he spoke, everybody listened. He was really good. Then come up to game day and all the media sort of attention starts ramping up and people are texting you and calling you and getting excited. Like up here in Queensland, you play at Suncorp Stadium for Origin, and I don't mind laughing at it. We have redneck Queenslanders hanging over the sidelines, cheering us on, going, "Kill him!" So it gets pretty intense up here, and then of course you get onto the field as well, and you spend those 7 to 10 days learning all these plays. Like there's the 4X play, there's the big Mel play, there's the Artie play, like this, where you've got to remember your position and roles to play within that play. And you spend all week memorizing it. And I'm an old front rower, so it took me a while to memorize these things. But you finally have it down pat, and you get on the field at Suncorp Stadium, and it is so noisy that Cooper Cronk will turn to you and call the play, and you can't actually hear him anyway. So you've taken all this time to learn the plays, but then you can't hear them. But thankfully, because we ran through them so many times at training, that I saw if Justin Hodges swept around the back and Sam Thaiday went through there, I was like, oh, all of a sudden I know that's the big Artie play. And so you sort of knew it visually rather than could hearing it by name. So yeah, there's a whole lot of complexities in there about the whole week, being surrounded by legends, the pressure of it. But I loved every minute of it and wished I could have played more, of course.
Yeah, you played it in a pretty good period for Queensland, from memory.
Oh yeah, look, that was sensational. And if I was ever going to coach Queensland, which I wouldn't, that would be the time I'd want to coach, because the team was just full of superstars. Mind you, of course, there's plenty of team of stars that aren't a star team, that old saying. There's plenty of those getting around. But from 1 to 17, it was just an exceptional team. And there's lots of unsung heroes unsung probably out of the state of Queensland, because within Queensland, there was guys like Nate Miles, Sam Thaiday, Jacob Lillyman, Neville Costigan, even guys who played less games like Josh Hannay and Adam Mogg, who every time they put on that Queensland jersey, whether it was 1 game or 10 games, they just took that ball forward, scored a gritty try, made a tough cover tackle, and they weren't the Inglishes and Slaters, but they were a huge part of why Queensland won those series.
So you mentioned Mal and how he was more of a sort of a motivating coach, but you played a lot of your career under Ricky Stuart, firstly at the Roosters, then at the Raiders. What was he like as a motivator?
He was pretty similar to Mal in that he thrived for those big moments. He wanted, I guess, a bit of that old school mentality, that mindset where you're tough and gritty and you can grind out tough wins like that. He obviously had his other sides to him there, where he's a bit like, a bit abrasive and a bit rough around the edges with things. And in my young years, so I had him at the Roosters when I was young, then the Raiders when I was a bit older. And in my young years at the Roosters, I probably didn't love his coaching style because of all those things, a bit rough around the edges, I guess. And he was trying to run the team this old school fashion, but everyone was a new school type of player, I guess. So he's trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And when I joined in 2002, we won the under-20s grand final, and first grade won the NRL grand final. So it was a big year for the Chooks. Then first grade made the next couple of finals, but then started losing a bit after that. And actually, unfortunate time for me, that's when I came into first grade, when they were losing. And a club like the Roosters don't like to lose. And so there's a huge amount of pressure on Ricky. So I guess some of those, unsavory personality traits of his got amplified, and it was a rough time with the Roosters. Anyway, he got let go. A lot of us stayed on as players, but then moved on in future years. Fast forward, but to Canberra Raiders years, and I had him again as a coach. And to be honest, I played my best footy under him in that second stint. I was a lot more mature and confident as a player. I knew what to do to make the team and play well in that team, and to keep the coach on side, I guess. And thankfully, like, I had a ripper of a year in my last year at the Raiders in 2015 under him. And it earned me a contract to go up to the Titans, move home to Queensland, which is a bit of a dream come true. So I guess, for all the things I probably struggled with in my younger years with Ricky, I understood why he was like that in my older years, and it probably brought out the best in me.
So he came across in the media as a guy with a pretty hard edge. And was he the same sort of guy at training as he was when you saw him in media interviews?
Well, actually, I should expand, and you probably picked it up on what I was saying, is that in that decade, I guess, that I didn't have him a coach, or just less than a decade, he really softened as a coach, to be honest. He stopped trying to get that square peg into a round hole, and he evolved as a coach. And so you got to give him credit that, he started as a first grade coach in 2002, and he's still around kicking today, which is very unusual for a coach. There's only like the Bellamy's and the Bennetts and those sorts of people that can do that sort of thing. Probably Tim Sheen before that. So he definitely evolved as a coach. And because the game's changed enormously, we've got a very multicultural playing squad these days with Pacific Islander players and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander players, and there's cultural differences there where you can't be this old school sort of coach and just whip people all the time and think they're going to be playing their best footy. But so he definitely adjusted. One of the wonderful things about Ricky, and I've actually reconnected with him through this, is he's a great bloke off the field, so to speak, away from training. He's got his personality, his persona, that he has as a head coach. But away from that, he's a really loyal bloke sort of guy, and he does an enormous amount for the community. And so we crossed paths again recently with one of the NDIS programs that we run with our business. We run these programs with people with disabilities to improve their social skills and confidence, community participation. And we ran one of these programs alongside the Canberra Raiders down there. And one of the people in the room with a disability said, I said, what was the best part of today? We're doing a bit of gratitude at the end of the day. And he goes, meeting Ricky Stuart. I said, oh, cool. Was he your favorite player, your coach? And he goes, I never saw him play. I'm not sure if he's a good coach, but he runs the Ricky Stuart Foundation that builds autism respite centers. And he's a wonderful man. I know lots of people that go there. So he was this young person at the Raiders doing this program with me, and he idolized Ricky Stuart, but it had nothing to do with sport. It was all about Ricky's community impact. So I just thought that was a pretty special story, and probably sums Ricky up for what he's like away from football.
You had a few leadership roles in your career. Was Ricky one of the coaches that sort of instigated that in your playing style, or turning you into one of those leaders?
Oh, not so much. It probably happened after that. So after Ricky left at the Roosters, one of the great coaches I had, only for a brief period of time, unfortunately, was Brad Fittler. And Freddie Fittler was a great mentor for me, and great role model, in that he helped me become a bit more confident, have a bit more presence on the field. Because I've always been a bit of a shyer, introverted sort of bloke that would rather, stand to the side and be the center of attention and things like that. But he really taught me my role as a front rower to dominate and have that presence where I'm taking the team forward and I'm stopping, obviously, the other team from coming forward. And just simple things like how I called for the ball off the dummy half, having some presence and authority with that, rather than hoping the dummy half would pass them the ball, demanding it from them. Things like that, he really helped me with. Yeah. And from there, I springboarded into being coached under Dave Ferner at the Raiders, and I went down there, I guess, as more of a senior player, and Fernsey wanted me to be more of a leader, take more of a central role in that team, and that's what I did. So I was really thankful that Freddie kickstarted that, and then Fernsey really nurtured it for me.
So you finished up your playing days at the Titans, and due to injuries, was it hard to retire due to injuries rather than going out on your own terms?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because, look, I retired. I was just about to turn 34. I've been playing in the NRL for roughly 12-ish years, over 200 games, of course. And so a lot of people have played a lot less than that and didn't get to play one game just through injuries. And so they would be like, you lucky bugger, that's incredible. But at the time, I still wanted to play on a couple more years. I was still under contract at the Titans for at least another season. And there's another option in that contract too for another year. I did have options to go and play over in the Super League. My manager was talking to about 4 or 5 clubs over there who made me an offer. But the sticking point, or the turning point, I guess, was I'd had all these scans on my shoulder that I'd busted a whole bunch of times, kept tearing my pectoral muscle, and had a big cyst on my bicep head, busted my clavicle. So my shoulder's pretty crook, struggling to tackle. And when I spoke to one of the coaches of the Super League teams that were making the offers, he said, he offered me a 2-year deal. And I said, would you give me a 3-year deal? And look, I'll come if it's a 3-year deal with that security. And he said, Dave, look, I'm happy to give you 2. I don't know about a 3, because, to be honest, like, a lot of Aussie players come over here in the back end of their career. They sign on for long-term contracts. And the first year they're busted with injury, we have to pay them out and they go home. And it just got me thinking. I was like, you know what? The last few years I've been dogged by injuries, and I'm pretty sure if I go over there, that's going to be me. I'm going to retire in that first year and have to get paid out. I'll be a liability and a waste of time, waste of money for that club. I didn't want to go through that. I didn't want to put them in that position, myself, of course. And I had a young family at that stage too. So I didn't want to uproot and go to England and it kind of be a waste of time. So I weighed up all those things and knew that I couldn't play in the NRL anymore, and didn't want to go to the Super League. So ended up retiring.
Just thinking about, what you just said, how crook your shoulder was. For people who haven't played rugby league at the level you have, or any other contact sports like that, what is it like, again, going back to that mental preparation, knowing you're busted and you've got to go out there and you've got to keep making tackles and even dealing with the pain? What's that sort of like for a player when you're on the field, when you're before the game, after the game? How does that feel?
It's a really funny one that when you're there in the moment, there's no other option or consideration, right? And not, when I say option, I don't mean you're forced to. It means you don't consider other options. Then now I'm retired, and it's been a few years since I've retired. I've softened right up, to be honest. Sometimes when I train, my legs start to hurt a bit, and I go, I don't really need to do this. And am I really getting that much of a gain out of it? Right. So look, I'm realistic with that. But more to your question is when you're an athlete like that, and you're determined, you're focused, it's your job, it's your career like that, pain, injuries, long-term damage, it's not something that really you ever process or think about. You just go, well, this is all part of it. So you get injured again, you get surgery, you're on the sidelines for 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever it is. That's all part of it. Yeah. And And it's a funny one when you retire, just flicking back to that question, is you do have obviously a bit of reflection on your career and go, oh, I wish I could have done that, or I'm really proud of that. One of the things you reflect on is all those injuries, and you go, well, I had 10 rounds of surgery. How am I going to feel when I'm 50 and 60 and 70 like that, let alone all the head knocks, but all the research is coming out around that. And we used to think it was just nothing back in the day. So you do kind of wonder, oh gosh, was it all worth it when you retire? And I think it was, but ask me again when I'm 60 or 70, I might say something different.
Yeah, well, mate, if we're still around kicking, I'll get you on the podcast in another 20 or 30 years. See what you think.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Dave, you're working now in the mental health space. How did you move into working in mental health?
I really love it. I think conversations around mental health, we usually talk about mental illness, and it's really a stigmatized, complicated, overwhelming sort of topic. What I found in rugby league was, we need to take a really strength-based approach to mental health, focusing on what we can do. And I discovered that, as I said, early in my career, thankfully, that I wouldn't say I got on top of it straight away in my career. It took me many years to get on top of it, but I started getting some support early on to kickstart that. And with the first time I saw a counsellor, just to handle some of those ups and downs that I was talking about, I thought it was embarrassing. I should be ashamed of myself. I didn't think it would do anything, of course, because all we ever talked about was physical health and physical fitness. We never talked about the mental side of things. But seeing that counsellor and talking through things that were worrying me, things that I was like just turning over my head for time and time again. I always found that if I turned things over my head, I never came to a solution. But if I talked it out or wrote it down, all the words fell into place, and I made sense of things. And the person listening, all they had to do is listen. They didn't actually have to offer me coping strategies or solutions or anything like that. Me just talking it out, I made sense of my own problems half the time. So that was my experience with a counsellor, and I loved it. And I got lots of professional benefits from it, as I mentioned, going on to play for Queensland, for Australia and stuff like that, let alone the longevity of your career. But then also obviously off the field too, being much happier. So I guess seeing that, talking about mental health, talking about, not being your best self from time to time, that's not scary. There's a lot of great help available and simple solutions sometimes to what you think is a complicated problem. That really, I guess, inspired me to normalize conversation around mental health, especially with blokes, when we think we're too tough or talking about things is a waste of time. So I really want to normalize that conversation, sharing my experience. But then I guess the next step from that, once you've sort of destigmatized mental health difficulties, is what can we do to strengthen our mental health, build our resilience? A lot of people use mental fitness as a word these days, which I think is good. So I've worked with different psychologists over the years to develop, and athletes, to develop a positive psychology program, well, a couple of them actually. And we run those online and face-to-face, where we explain to people that, through different tools and strategies, these positive psychology activities, you can build your mental health, your mental fitness in a really positive way. So look, it's going to take time for the community to, and we're getting some great results, but in the broader community, I think it's going to take time to shift that focus of mental health from mental illness to mental fitness. But I want to be a part of that shift and be a positive influence on people.
Dave, you talked about the first time you went and spoke to a counsellor.
Mm.
It can be quite hard, especially for a male, to open up and talk to someone about their problems and mental health, because we tend to feel weak or like we aren't capable if we need to talk about these sorts of things. So what are some of the strategies to initiate these first conversations?
Yeah, well, I'd say two sides of that question, and I'll come back to the second side, but to answer your question first, what I was sort of talking about works for me, I find works for a lot of people, is writing things down and obviously talking about it. But before you talk to somebody else, try typing it out on a piece of paper, what's going on for you on the computer, or writing it out on a piece of paper. Just start listing things that are worrying you like that. And you might get one thing, or you might find you have 20 things like that. And it could be, my girlfriend, my partner, I'm fighting with her a lot. It could be I hate my job, don't feel rewarded, I'm struggling to connect with my kids, I don't see my mates enough. It might be lots of different things like that. And just start writing it all down to get some clarity over probably what's important, what's the most pressing issue like that, what things you might be able to actually solve practically straight away and tick off your list. But if anything, it gets those juices flowing, I guess, and gets you starting to think about it and talk about it. Because a lot of people I talk to, like a lot of blokes, they just don't know where to start if they're going to have the conversation. So that makes having the conversation so much harder if they don't know where to start, right? So yeah, I think potentially a small tip is just to start writing things down, type it out on a computer like that, get things off your chest, and think about what's most important. I was just going to say the other side of it too, which I'm not sure if you're going to ask me, but is what we can do with each other, I guess, to support those conversations. So it's obviously not us that needs to have the conversation. As mates, I'm really passionate about just saying to people, just reach out to your friends and say good day, ask how they're going. If they say, yeah, fine, but you're pretty sure they're not fine, ask again in a different way. How's things at home, or how's things at work, or did you go to the footy on the weekend? And just get the conversation going to a point where they feel comfortable. And that might be you guys go for a walk somewhere and stand side by side, so it's not confrontational and uncomfortable. It could be you go fishing or kick the footy down the park, like a nice environment where it's relaxed. So I just want to throw that extra bit in there that maybe writing things down and making a start of how we're going to talk about things would help. But then as mates as well, make sure we set up that environment and that trust in the relationship to be able to have these sorts of conversations.
There seems to be a large number of athletes who struggle with mental health post-career. Is this something you work in or an area you look at?
Oh, not so much with the athletes, but I certainly do empathise with them, because there's so much tied to transitioning out of support from, you're at often you're at the top of the pecking order, or your most skillful person in the field, I guess, like that. And then you change careers, and more often than not, you're the least skillful at the bottom of the pecking order. And there's no ego on that or anything. It's more around confidence, self-esteem, and your outlook on life. So there's that to start with. Quite often there's a financial change too. So you might be earning, depending on what sport you're in, things like that, you could be earning really good money, up to some of these guys earn over $1 million a year now. And then you get a regular job, so to speak, and you're down to 70, 80 or 100,000 a year, which is still plenty of money, but compared to what they were earning, just a little fraction of it. And then probably for me, what I found as well was around my identity. And, you go straight out of school into the system, and you're automatically, Dave Shillington, the Roosters player or Raiders player, the footy player, like that. And that's how you get around. That's how you're introduced to people. People come up to you and know you for that, like that. And then you retire, and you're like, oh, people come and introduce you. Dave Shillington, what do you do again? Like that, you're not the footy player anymore. Yeah. And I just remember this one time that really hit me about 4 months after I retired. I became a project officer for the NRL. I remember filling out these forms, and they're like, your job, like your name, date of birth, your job. And I'd go office worker, and I didn't know what to write because I've always just wrote sports person. And these people from Coffs Harbour and this they ran this mental health awareness day, and they invited me down as the project officer for the NRL. And so I went down there, and a lady was my chaperone, and she was a lovely lady. But when she introduced me to everyone, all the kids, she goes, "Oh, kids, this is Dave Shillington. He's an NRL front rower." And the kids would say at the start, "Oh, are you an NRL front rower?" And I went, "Yeah. Oh, no, not really. No, I'm not actually." It must have sounded like the biggest drongo ever. And then over time, throughout that day, when kids had asked me, when she would introduce me as the NRL front rower, I'd go, "Well, I used to play. I don't now. I work for the NRL like this." And I remember driving home, having to think about that whole identity piece, and trying to get comfortable talking about myself and meeting new people and having a different identity.
Yeah, no, it is something that must be difficult to overcome. Dave, you're now the business owner of Prime Effect, and I see you offer a range of services, and you talked briefly about mental fitness before. I noticed one of them is mental health first aid. I've done my first aid course before. What is mental health first aid?
Yeah, it's actually growing in popularity. And look, not everyone's heard of it yet, but it's starting to become really, really popular, which is great. If you think of physical first aid, it's a training program where if you're in the workplace, in the community group, wherever you are, someone falls over and busts their arm open, there's blood everywhere. As a physical first aider, you're sort of first there on the scene. You're not a professional medical person or anything like that, but you do have those skills to maybe wrap a bandage, make sure no further harm comes to that person or people around them, and then get them into professional support if they need it. So that's physical first aid. Well, mental health first aid is pretty similar to that, but from a mental health point of view. So if you and I were out in the public somewhere and someone was in a lot of distress, or we're in the workplace and over time we see someone come under stress, one of our mates maybe like that, we could have that initial conversation, that initial support for people, and open up that conversation, see what's going on, give them some more information about what support services might be available, maybe give them some practical solutions too, within our personal limitations. And then if they do need professional support, that's where our sort of role as a mental health first aider stops, like that. So it's very similar to physical first aid in that we provide that initial contact, initial support as best we can, and then leave it to the professionals beyond that. And why it's really popular, I guess, is that, the last time the stats were collected a couple of years ago, we saw that 20% of the population would have a mental illness in a year. Since then, we've had bushfires and COVID, of course. It's been a bit of chaos. So you have to think the next round of stats, when they get collected, those numbers, those stats will be definitely on the rise. We also know that support services are really overwhelmed. So counsellors, psychologists, especially child psychologists like that. So they're tough to get into sometimes. But then there's also a huge cohort of the population that don't want to engage with those professional services. So it makes sense to me to equip more of the community with these basic skills around mental health first aid, to navigate those conversations and support people as best we can as individuals. So that's why I love that course. It's gaining really a lot of popularity.
Awesome. And what sort of people, or which sort of is it businesses that are taking on these courses where there's a lot of staff involved, or who tends to be the ones taking up these sorts of courses?
Yeah, a bit of both now. A bit of everything. Is internally at workplaces, we're equipping, I guess, people with those skills so they can have conversations with each other that are normal and safe. There's a lot of self-reflection in those courses, so you learn a lot of how to take care of yourself at the same time. But then there's those external-facing staff too. And so, for instance, I'm doing one for some accountants and financial planners soon, who have a lot of personal conversations with clients. And then another sporting organisation who's got lots of different development officers out in the field. They're mixing with kids and adults and different things and having different conversations like that. So that's that work, being able to manage your own mental health, but then also having a more mentally healthy workplace, but then also navigating conversations with the community these days who are a little bit more distressed than they used to be. Yeah,
okay. And do you do much work with the youth community or the Indigenous space?
Not heaps of in the Indigenous space. I've always looked to do that because I've got to play alongside some incredible Indigenous athletes, and on the occasion I did things with like Willie Tonga and Preston Campbell and those guys. We worked together with the NRL. I really found in the Indigenous space, to be best placed to support young Indigenous people, you should be an older Indigenous player, former player or current player. That cultural relatability, I found delivering programs, that was super important. When Preston Campbell and I would go and deliver programs together, it was so obvious that I would drive the PowerPoint sometimes or the group discussions, and some of the kids would be a little bit, disinterested or half interested. And then Presto would talk about, growing up and discovering his identity as a young Indigenous man, and all the kids would stop what they're doing, lean forward and say, "Yes, tell me more." So I did find that, and but the youth space in general, we started working in schools just recently, which is good. Once again, I was really inspired by understanding the size of the issue with young people and the lack of options and support they have due to things being overwhelmed, services being overwhelmed. I spoke to my mate who's a head of sport at a big private school, got 1,800 kids, and this is years ago. And I was sort of learning the lay of the land, and I said, "Oh, so do you guys have a student counsellor here?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, we've got 5 of them." And I said, "Oh, and do the kids feel confident? If feel a need to come and use those counsellors?" And he said, "Yeah, they're booked out all day, every day, year round, and I get overflow into my offices of kids just not coping." And so that really made me think, well, I need to deliver this mental health first aid course to teachers, to parents who will have those inevitable conversations where a young person's struggling, and the teachers need to navigate that conversation confidently. Yep. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in schools, and I really enjoy it for those reasons.
Yeah, nice. So is there any other, obviously the Prime Effect, you cover a lot of bases in terms of mental health and wellbeing. Are there any other projects on the horizon?
So our digital positive psychology program is super exciting. We've only just recently released that. When I work with the NRL in their program, we opened up to all these conversations around mental health and provided some practical training. And the same thing happens in that mental health first aid. But after every workshop, people would come up and say, "Dave, I love the way you talk about mental health. What else can we do?" And I didn't have anything else. And there's a real thirst for people to have some more tools, strategies, things to do to boost their mental health. And the other side of things is whenever I deliver to the adults in like junior sporting clubs, there's always a parent that would say, "Dave, the kids today, they're not resilient, mate. They're just not resilient." And I'd always listen to that. But after a while, I started saying, well, what tools and strategies are we giving them to build their resilience? And all that combined, I guess, the thirst for things, the need for things like that, led me to developing this program. And knowing, how good sport it was as a platform to engage people, and how much people enjoyed listening to athletes talk about their ups and downs and setbacks, some of their strategies they use like that. I used athletes now in this program to introduce the different plays, advocate for the plays by talking about their personal connection to it or how they do it in their lives, and then a call to action as well to inspire people to complete the plays. The plays are all positive psychology activities. So the idea is that these programs, it's a mental health, mental fitness program. If you went to the gym once to work on your physical health, you'd feel like a little bit better, of course. But if you went consistently over 25 days or longer for a period of weeks, then you'd notice a real difference in your physical health, your physical fitness. If you had a coach and a program that was evidence-based, it would accelerate those gains and make sure they're safe as well. So similar concept with mental health and mental fitness. If we practice gratitude today and mindfulness, things like that, you probably feel better today. But if we did it consistently over time, we'd feel a whole lot better. So we're providing the programs and the coaches for people to do that, accelerate it and make it safe.
Okay, so that's what mental fitness is. It's not just focusing on mental health for one day out of the week or one day in a month. It's developing that over and over again so that you have, I guess, better mental fitness. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have heard of the mental health continuum and know that our mental health can range on that continuum. If we have some tough days, and then we have some great periods of our life too, where we feel like really healthy, functioning part of our life. Through different positive psychology activities, things like gratitude and mindfulness that I mentioned, but then also other things like how we eat, like how that affects our mood, how we sleep and how we move, our social connections, understanding our strengths and our value we add to the world, all those sorts of things, they can push us up that continuum into that green zone. And I really want people to understand that if they are feeling lousy today or they're trying to build their resilience, there's lots of things you can do yourself. You don't have to rely on other people. You don't have to sit around and think, oh, there's no hope for me. This is just the way I am, like that. We really want to empower people with those skills and strategies to manage their own mental health and build their own mental fitness.
Coming out of that education space, I think this would be a great idea for schools and clubs, like you mentioned, Do you have a website for people who might be interested in having a look at what Prime Effect might be able to do for them?
Yeah, it's simply www.primeeffect.com.au.
All right.
And look, I chose the name Prime Effect for the business because as an elite athlete, we would always do different priming exercises to get ourselves in our prime, I guess. I'll use that word a couple of times. And it would be like on game day, we do different stretching and jumping exercises or a short burst of an activity, a physical activity that the science told us that would make us more primed to play that evening. Or it might be more specific to training that day, where we do different activation exercises for our glutes and our core and things like that. And that would help us perform better. So the stimulus in this business is our positive psychology programs and the coaching. And the effect on people will be to get them in their prime or prime to perform.
Yeah, I really like how you've explained that. It sounds great. Dave, I want to go backwards now and go back into your playing career. So apologies if I'm messing with your personal identity going in and out of your playing days, but would have something like what you're doing now have been helpful for clubs and individual players when you were first coming onto the scene?
Well, really, that's how I found out about a lot of them is in the back end of my career, we got taught some of these skills, right? So I got to find out about it or feel the benefits of it firsthand. And then, later, obviously, the more recent years, really research and work with other psychologists to put the evidence behind it and present it in a program like this. But to answer your question, like the attitude towards mental health in the NRL changed enormously over my time. It changed in society as well, of course, at the same time. And I started obviously in 2002, as I said. Back then, if you talked about your emotions or not coping, you'd get laughed out of the change rooms, told to find a different sport. That was just the lay of the land back then. But gradually over time, probably around 2012, 2014, even like that. Around that time, things started to shift a whole lot. One person actually had a huge impact on the NRL, and some of your listeners would have heard of him. I'm surprised more haven't actually. Hugh Van Cuylenburg, who runs the Resilience Project. He runs different workshops. He's got a book, The Resilience Project, it's pretty popular. He came and did a presentation to us at the Titans and one or two other clubs. And he was a bit unknown then, but he just did an incredible presentation talking about the power of gratitude, right? Talking about the skill set, I guess, of mindfulness, but a lot of it was around gratitude, really, actually. And it wasn't something we'd ever really thought about ourselves. And I don't think it was a common language in the community either. So he was a bit of a trailblazer there. Obviously, it was talked about in other circles, but he was a trailblazer in bringing it to the community and making it appetizing and resonating with people. So his workshop was amazing. And I remember walking out of that workshop and ringing a couple of my brothers who are managers at their work saying, hey, if you want to do something for your employees that has a big impact, you should book this Hugh Van Cuylenburg. Anyway, the NRL head, governing body started to understand this impact Hugh was having at a couple of clubs, and they booked Hugh to deliver to all the clubs in all the grades. He was that good. And then the media picked it up and his profile just blew up, and he was doing all other sports as well. So, he's been running a wonderful business and much deserved. So his workshop, focusing on some of those tools of resilience around gratitude, mindfulness, and empathy. The NRL ran heaps of workshops over the years like this, but none of them gained any traction compared to what this did. And so it instantly resonated with us, these sort of, tools of resilience. So much so that the head trainer scheduled these activities into our training schedule, which is pretty far out for us the first time we saw it, because normally it's all around our physical fitness. So it'd be 2 hours on the field, followed by ice baths, swimming, recovery like that. Then an hour and a half in the gym, then maybe a yoga class or cycling in the afternoon, depending on the workload of the day. Never anything to do with mental health. But after Hugh visited and a few other things happened, every day we'd come into training and pull down our journal from the top of our lockers, and we'd write down things we were grateful for that day. Maybe it was something good that happened yesterday. Maybe it was something nice this morning, something we're excited about for the rest of the day. Just things we're grateful for. And the science behind that, as you would know, and a lot of your listeners would know, is is really rock solid. It's not just an idea. We know that practicing gratitude over time retrains your brain to pick up all those good things in the world we have, rather than focusing on the things we don't have, like that. So it's a really powerful thing. And then the other thing we added to our training schedule was mindfulness practices through deep breathing. And we all went to a function room at the Parkwood High Performance Facility, laid on our backs. The trainer dimmed the lights and pressed play on a meditation app. Now, when it went all silent, a few of the boys thought it was a joke and did a bit of fart noises and giggled, and overgrown teenagers, really. But we all took it seriously moving forward, and we know walking out from that first breathing session like that, we felt better. We felt refreshed, a bit reset. Thought we could have a bit more energy for the rest of the day, actually. So, performance-wise, it was great for us. But then a lot of us took it home to our personal lives too. And I practice gratitude around the table with my kids now. It's it's not something we do in an orchestrated way where I go, right, let's practice gratitude. It's just simple questions like, who'd you play with today at school? Who'd you have fun with? What did you learn? Like things like that. And then, as far as mindfulness goes, I love it at nighttime, every night still, where I do different breathing exercises to help some of the chaos in my head calm down, so I can get a good night's sleep. So, it's been wonderful to see the NRL shift like that from being not talking about your mental health to actively practicing these skills as a team.
Okay, nice. So when you played, you mentioned before playing with some absolute superstars from Queensland, guys like Thurston, Cameron Smith, Cooper Cronk, Billy Slater, for example. Were these guys ultra talented, or were they also really mentally strong as well?
Bit of everything, yeah. So, and they're all different people in different ways. And people often ask me to try and say, oh, who was the best player you played with, or who was the best leader, like that. And gosh, it's a split decision with a fair few of those guys. Someone like Cameron Smith, completely calm, cool, collected under pressure. You cannot rattle that bloke. Well, if you do rattle him, he's got the best poker face in the world, because I've never seen him rattled. He, in his younger years, he never described as the ultimate professional. He was a bit more happy-go-lucky. But as he got older, he became more of that ultimate professional and that leader, and would always lead things at training with his dedication, his discipline to things like that. He's a big part of that Melbourne culture. But then I think of someone like Cooper Cronk as well, who was the ultimate professional. He juiced every bit of talent out of his body through sheer hard work and determination. I remember at Origin camp, we'd have a day off on the Monday before the Wednesday game, and a few of us front rows, Petro and Benny Hannon and Matty Scott, would go see a movie and put our feet up, and Cooper would take a bag of footies down to the field and practice field goals and things like that. And one particular game, that practice all paid off, and he kicked the winning field goal from about 40 out. So his, spectacular efforts weren't through sheer luck. That was through sheer determination and hard work. And probably the last guy I'll talk about, I should talk about lots of them, like Billy Slater and them as well. But the last guy I'd probably talk about is JT, Jonathan Thurston, in that, I played with him back in the under-12s team, actually. And he was just like a larrikin, very, very rough around the edges, he'll a bit too. But just an exceptional talent, hands down, just the most naturally gifted player like I've seen. And, we played all our juniors against each other and with each other in different rep teams. In grade 12, we played a schoolboy carnival, and we were killing it, our team, until we came up against him in the semis. And scores were tied, and all of a sudden he did a show and go and scored, then a chip and chase and scored, and we never ran them down after that. They single-handedly tore us apart. And then fast forward, obviously, into the NRL for Queensland, for Australia, just a ridiculous talent. I think he would talk about too, maturing in his later years and being more of a leader, more of a consistent professional. But all those guys, hey, like, some of them had natural talent, some of them had to work their asses off for it, but they all turned into wonderful leaders and just, game-breaking players as well.
Okay. And you also mentioned Mal Meninga before as being a great motivator and a great leader. What made him so special? What made him so good at motivating and leading?
Mel, he was just so passionate about what he was doing. And look, when Origin started back in 1980, even if some of the guys in the current Origin team are only 20 years old and weren't even around back then, like I was only born in 83, you all knew what type of player Mel was. He was a no-nonsense, tough-as-nails player who performed at all levels of footy. And so when someone's got the runs on the board like that and they've been there and done it, first of all, you have instant respect for him, right? But then as a coach, he manages to articulate the vision and that passion to the players in such a meaningful way that when he talks, you don't sort of break eye contact. You certainly, if a plane flew past, you wouldn't even notice. You wouldn't be looking up at it or anything like that. You're like locked on to every word he has to say. So he's got a great delivery method of his coaching. And he's a fair person, Mel, as well. Some coaches get caught up in politics or inconsistencies and things like that, and it gets people offside and you lose the room sometimes. But Mel would always just tell you what the exact story was, where you stood with him, what he needed from you, and if he didn't deliver, he told you like that. But if he did deliver too, he'd tell you as well. So look, I kind of ramble there, but he's just he was obviously an incredible player that lived and breathed it, and then his ability to deliver that passion and instill that intent in people was just second to none. Yeah, great. So Dave, last question. I noticed I'm going back to Prime Effect here. I noticed you guys do have a high performance mentoring sort of program specifically for athletes. Can you tell me a little bit about this and who if I'm a young athlete and I'm keen to get some mentoring from someone like yourself, how do I go about doing this? Yeah, so whether it's athletes or people in the corporate space, the great Brad Fittler used to drill into us as players, and it really resonated with me and stuck with me, is if you get your life in order off the field, it reflects well on the field. So once again, if you're talking about an athlete, how they live their life outside of their performance time, and if someone in the workplace, because we do work with like GMs and CEOs and things like that, how they perform in the workplace and how they enjoy it too, is influenced by what they're doing away from the office. So what we do is just start brainstorming all those different barriers and challenges that people have that think they're holding them back, that is holding them back. And then we go about providing strategies for those challenges, right? But on top of that, we talk about all the good things, all the things they could do that would benefit their career, right? And we start stacking those up as daily habits that they can tick off their list every day. And over time, we just see the simplicity of removing barriers and introducing more and more healthy habits, and then the energy shifts and the confidence shifts, so that people know they're thriving off the field, and that confidence and that skill starts displaying on the field too, or in the office. So look, everyone's got self-doubt. Even if you're a high performer, paid well, and you play well, everyone's got self-doubt. Everyone's got sort of derailers, that things they shouldn't engage in, or things that they do engage in, and it gives them setbacks. So it's about identifying that, normalizing it, and building really healthy habits and strengths around that to counter it. And look, it's a great way to wrap up the conversation, because they're the things that really helped me with my career, is that I had to take away all those negative things and build in positive things. And as a result, I was able to realize a fair bit of my potential. So if I can help other people do that as well, then I would feel really proud of those efforts.
Awesome, Dave. I really appreciate your time today. It's been awesome to hear a little bit about your background in playing, but then also having a look at and it comes across as a real love for developing good, positive mental health in a range of different areas. And I can see that passion for, improving mental health in our community, not just in sport, but across the whole community on a whole, is really going to help a lot of people. So, mate, thank you so much for everything you're doing in terms of your space in Prime Effect. And thank you so much for spending time with me on the Coach Doctor podcast today.
All right. Thanks, James. It was great to be with you, and I hope your listeners enjoyed it.
So some of the key takeaways from this episode for me were that firstly, Shillo talked about getting into training early and working on the parts of his game that created the most anxiety for him as a player. Now, you can do this as a business person, as a sports person, or even, as a student in education. So if he was concerned about his fitness, he'd do more to strengthen it. So basically, he took areas of his game that he was most concerned about and he turned them into a strength. Another key message from Shillo was the idea of talking to someone who can just listen. They didn't necessarily have to give him the answers, but being able to talk to someone who listened allowed him to process concerns and develop solutions. These experiences helped him to normalise conversations around mental health, especially for blokes who are too tough to talk about these problems. So Dave also discusses mental health first aid, a way to equip everyday people with the skills to provide first care assistance to people going through mental health problems before a more experienced practitioner can take over. So this was another great idea that Dave uses with his program at Prime Effect. And finally, Dave refers to the term mental fitness, which I initially had no idea what he was talking about when he talked about mental fitness. But when he compares it to physical fitness and the idea that if you went to the gym once, it might be beneficial, but if you went to the gym every day or, for a long period of time, you'd start to develop good physical fitness. So by doing a little bit of mental training every day, and he talks about doing a bit of mindfulness and gratitude training and those sorts of things, you can build mental fitness the same way you can build physical fitness. And I really like this idea and how he sells the importance of mental fitness as well. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast with David Shillington. And if you're a Queenslander, good luck for the state of origin. But if you're a New South Welshman like me, go the Blues. Please share this podcast amongst your friends and colleagues. And if you're interested in finding more out about Prime Effect, you can view the website primeeffect.com.au or contact Dave via LinkedIn. I'll add the website and the contact details to the show notes. In the meantime, stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks for listening.